Hi, I'm Blythe Davis, and this is my CSE 564 final project for spring 2021. I chose to visualize a variety of demographic data from the Southeastern United States. In particular, I looked at 505 counties. So these are all the counties in the states of Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida. I decided to use these data because I grew up in a small county on the coast of North Carolina called Hyde County. You can see it right here on the map. Our literacy rates, numeracy rates, average income, that kind of thing, are a lot lower than the national average. Similarly, our poverty rates are almost twice as high. And by poverty rate, I mean the percent of people who are below the poverty line. For context, the national average is about 10.5%, and the average in my county is closer to 20%. These trends are pretty reflective of the entire Southeastern region. On average, counties there have lower median incomes, lower literacy rates, lower education levels, and higher poverty levels than other places in the US, and they also have higher violent crime rates. So I wanted to see what the interplay among these variables and a few others was in this part of the country. Another reason I chose to do the visualization the way I did is because of these low literacy rates and low education rates. Many individuals from the Southeast don't have access to good resources to help them learn to interpret graphs. And so when using government provided resources or many of the other resources available online, it might be hard for them to interpret. For example, most of the visualizations I came across when doing background research for my project were really text heavy or slow or out of date. And this makes it difficult for anyone, but especially people who don't have formal training with reading charts. It makes it very difficult for them to see what's going on. So I wanted to include some components in my visualization that were intuitive, for example, a map, as well as components that were more advanced, like an MDS plot for people who really want to get into the weeds of how visualization works. So now on to the actual visualization. You can see it on this page. There are 5 main components, which I'll go over in a minute, and they're all connected. But first, I wanted to highlight this feature down here. When the page loads, this button that provides an explanation of variables pops up. If you click on it, a modal comes up with more details about all the abbreviations and what these variables actually mean, because I didn't want to clutter the graphs with lots of little explanations. To get rid of this box over here, you just hit the minus button. To bring it back up, you can hit the plus. Now let's start from the top left. Here we have a choropleth map, and you can see that the active variable is literacy average by county. The higher colors, or the more intense colors represent a higher literacy rate. So for example, counties like Loudoun County, Virginia, and like Wake County, North Carolina, where Raleigh is, have higher literacy rates, whereas counties such as Hancock County, Georgia, and Stewart County, Georgia, have lower literacy rates. On the middle top, we have a histogram, which shows the same variable, the active variable literacy average, and its frequency. So you can see that it has a pretty much normal distribution. And on the top right, we also have this scatter plot that shows the distribution of literacy average with respect to the y-axis, which here we've chosen to be education. Notice that when mousing over points on the scatter plot, the name of the county and the state comes up, just like it did on the choropleth map. All of these graphs, as well as the other two, are linked, and I'll show you the brushing in a minute, but first I want to talk about the other 2 charts. So down on the bottom left, we have the MDS plot for attributes. This shows how correlated they tend to be. So those with higher correlations are closer to each other. Those with lower correlations are further apart. And in my chart, the color and weight of the links represents the direction and strength of the correlation. So red represents a negative correlation. Green represents a positive correlation. You can see that, for example, unemployment and jail population rate, that's JPR, have a pretty weak negative correlation. So it's a very light link, but it is red in color, so it's negative. Whereas variables like median income, numeracy, literacy, and education levels have higher, stronger correlations that are positive. Also, you'll notice that literacy right here is red. The dot, that indicates that it's the active variable. When we switch the active variable, this color will change back to the normal one, and the ones that have blue as their color right now, the new active one will turn red. And also this plot's interactive, so you can drag it around to kind of explore the relationships among the variables. Now on the bottom right, we have what's called a Mary-Mecco chart, or just a Mecco chart. This is like a stacked area chart, but for categorical variables. So here we have the breakdown of industry, so leading employment industry by state. And this chart is filterable. So for example, if you click on North Carolina, let's say we just want to look at the variables for North Carolina, all the other charts refactor with this new information. So everything in the core Blythe map except North Carolina gets grayed out. This is the new literacy average distribution for North Carolina. This is the new correlation, or the new scatter plot of literacy versus education for North Carolina. And this is the new MDS plot, which was computed just looking at the North Carolina data. We can also filter again by industry. So let's say we just want to look at the counties in North Carolina whose main industry of employment is production and transportation. We can click on that item in the legend and it filters it further. We click again, everything goes back to normal. So now let's talk a little bit about the linking between the other charts. We can, of course, change the active variable. So right now it's on literacy average, but let's say we want to look at poverty levels. So this is the proportion of the county who is below the national poverty line. And again, our Blythe map updates, as do the others. So we can now see poverty on the histogram as well as the scatter plot. And we can also use brushing to filter the data. So let's check it out on the histogram. Let's select this region. And now the other charts gray out the non-active data points, and the MDS plot refactors, as does the Mecco plot, just to look at these points. So these are the breakdowns of the industry by state, only considering the counties that fall into this distribution or this region of the poverty levels. Okay, clicking again takes everything back to normal. Now let's see what happens when we visualize a categorical variable as the active point. Let's go with industry. First, we see that the core Blythe map updates. So now the scale is discrete instead of continuous. And just as we saw on the Mecco chart earlier, most places have management, business, and arts as the main industry in the county. So this is the same data pretty much as the Mecco chart, except it's sorted by county instead of state, but visualized in a different way. We also note that in the MDS plot, the active variable isn't there anymore. That's because it's categorical. You can't visualize that on an MDS plot, so none of them are highlighted in red. When we filter using the brushing on the scatter plot or the bar chart, now all the other charts update as well. So these are just the counties in the country or in the region that have production transportation, which we highlighted here as their main industry. You can see that the other ones are grayed out over here on the scatter plot. And similarly on the Mecco plot, the only things that are in color are the production and transportation. So what's interesting is that all the states but Florida have counties that have production and transportation as their main industry, but Florida doesn't have any. Clicking takes it back to normal. We can also click on the Mecco plot to filter. So let's just look, for example, at the Florida data. That redraws all the charts with Florida as the only data source, so it filters out the other 4 states. And clicking again just shows us the one, or I guess 2 counties in Florida, right here and here, that have natural resources and construction as their main industries. And as usual, clicking again takes us back to normal. One more thing I wanted to show is what happens when we don't have enough data points to draw an MDS plot. So one example of this is the military sector. There's only one county in the Southeastern region, that's Chattahoochee County, Georgia. You can see it over there on the map, that has military as its main industry. This modal box pops up saying that there's only one data point that's found, which is not enough to generate a new MDS plot because MDS looks at correlations. We don't really have correlations if there's just one data point. So it's just letting the user know that the plot that's shown is for all the data points. X out of there. And clicking takes us back to normal. Finally, I want to show what happens that we can change the active variable on the y-axis over here on the scatter plot. So for example, let's put income. There you go. And just to close off, we'll put this back to literacy. And you can see that there's a positive trend between literacy and income, which is pretty unsurprising. I hope you enjoyed this presentation, and thank you so much for listening.